Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Casey Turner Presents Talk to Me. Today's guest, reporting all the way from Austin, Texas, is Alejandro Escovedo. I've been so looking forward to this special Memorial Day edition of Talk to Me. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. If you wouldn't mind, comment below. Let us know where you're watching from. It's always fun to see where everyone's tuning in from all over the world. It's really neat to go back and look at that. Also, share this right now. That way we can get as many people watching as possible. You can start a watch party or do whatever you can do to help spread the word. And if this is your first time being introduced to Alejandro, I'm super excited that you're here, and I'm excited to get you to learn about him and his music and his amazing story. And if you have already been a fan of Alejandro's for years, hopefully you'll learn something new about him and his life that maybe you didn't know otherwise. But other than that, we're just excited that you're all tuning in. Thank you so much for being here. Also, down in the comments, you can see a link to Alejandro's website where you can purchase his latest record, The Crossing, and and lots of other merchandise. But without further ado, welcome the very special, the wonderful, my friend, Alejandro Escovedo. Good to see you, buddy.
Great to see you, Casey. You're looking good, man. You're looking real good. Good to see you.
You're looking better. We were joking kind of earlier. It's not really a joke. Alejandro's got the best haircut in quarantine, no doubt. There's no question.
Well, there's a secret behind that. Yeah, we'll divulge it later, a little later. Yeah.
How are you guys holding up? I know that so recently you did move back to the Austin area, and you're kind of out in the country. And I've had the pleasure to see your wonderful home. But it must be nice to have a yard and a little downtime during all this.
I've actually, at first it came as a big shock, as I'm sure it did to most everyone. And we were ready to leave on a tour on March 16th. And I had been rehearsing the band for The Crossing in Spanish. We were going to do La Cruzada, as it's called in Spanish. And so Alex Ruiz, who was sang the album for me, was with me. And we had Tony Nobles on pedal steel guitar and keyboards, and Nick Diaz on guitar. We were all ready to go. We've been rehearsing for quite a while. And then on March 12th, of course, we got the phone call that everything was canceled, and we didn't understand exactly the severity of what was happening until we got a phone call from a friend in Italy, actually, while we were all here rehearsing at the house. And we played it, and we suddenly understood that it was a very intense and serious situation for a lot of us. So anyway, tour was canceled, and as time passed, found out that all my touring has been pushed back to possibly the spring of 2021, if then. But as far as how we've been doing, it's been up and down. I actually got a little sick. I caught what could have been the virus, and I spent 2 weeks in quarantine from Nancy. She was on the other side of the house. I was on this side. And it was a little rough. And then Nancy got it a little bit, but we're fine now. And we haven't been tested, but we took it. My doctor told me to treat it with the sense that I did have it. So anyway, but we're feeling better. We're doing what a lot of people are doing. I think we're out in the yard, spending a lot of time outside as much as possible. Go for walks every day, go for hikes every day. We have enough property that we can go on a hike, so we've been making the best of it.
I mean, can you remember in your span of your career being off from the road for this amount of time, especially when summer is about to rev up?
Absolutely not. I mean, I've been talking with Chuck Prophet, of course, and we were both talking about how much work we've done over the years. For me, something close to 45 years of touring, and Chuck's been touring. He hits it really hard also, and in a way, it was kind of a relief that the pause button was hit for just a little while. And it gave me a chance to finally do things that I haven't had the chance to do for quite a while. A lot of it involves, the drag was that I couldn't see my family like I wanted to now that I'm close to them, living close to them. But at the same time, we've learned how to kind of gather with social distancing. We wear the mask and everything. So we're taking all the precautions around each other, but I do get to see them. Um, but yeah, I never thought that I'd have 2 months of absolutely doing nothing. And that's kind of what I've been doing is absolutely nothing.
Yeah, I've had a mixed review from because I've been doing this podcast live stream twice a week for a little while now. That's what's been keeping me sane. It's kind of my creative outlet. I feel very fortunate. I can call up friends like you and be like, "Hey, you want to chat for a little bit and just share some stories?" And it's really fun. And I think it's just great to have you. But one of the things a lot of folks have been saying, it's been a mixed review of like some people have been super creative during this time. They're like writing an album, and some people are just like not inspired to write or do anything right now. They're kind of just taking it all in. How has your art kind of been affected at home? Have you been feeling creative, or you been more like less?
I think that sometimes you almost get overamped by what's happening around you. And this was such a strange and unique situation that, emotionally, I lost some friends because of this disease. And I think with the loss of John Prine, I kind of really kind of went into a spiral in a way, and it's been very heavy on my mind. And so when I'm that consumed with emotion and thoughts, and you have that moment to where you can really look back on a lot of things and begin to kind of see things in a different way because of this chance to get perspective on it. I haven't been writing, you know. I have not been writing songs. I've been kind of gathering a lot of thoughts within me to write with, but I can't say that I've taken pen to paper and written any songs whatsoever. I do play my guitar from time to time and come up with some ideas and we record them, but for the most part, I've been really just kind of reading and watching a lot of movies. I get Criterion and I love Criterion, so I watch a lot of films. And that's always been my love. So I've been, it's been all right. I'm not worried about it, about creating.
Yeah, I think that's a good attitude to have. I mean, absolutely, um, for sure. I mean, yeah, that's a good answer. Well, I want to kind of start this saying I want to give people kind of a glimpse of your life, and I think if we were to talk about your life and your career and all the amazing things you've done, this would be like a 9-day conversation. But since we've only got about an hour or so, we'll just kind of touch on a few things. But I want to start with where tell folks where you grew up at, and because you grew up in a very large family, and which pumped out a lot of great musicians, which is a really funny thing, which I would love to talk more about. But what was childhood like for you, and how did you find your way into music?
Wow. I was born in San Antonio, Texas, just down the road from here, and I was born in 1951. Um, and I was born to a large family. My father had already had 7 children when he married my mother. Actually, 8 children when he married my mother. And then there was 5 of us through my mother, from my mother. And we grew up in San Antonio. I was her oldest, my mother's oldest. Grew up in San Antonio, Texas until the age of 7 when we were told that we were going on vacation to California to visit our family in California. And we ended up in Orange, California, in Orange County. And it was there that my father one day literally shook hands with a man, and we owned a house in Orange. And we never went back to Texas, is the strange thing about this story. We never returned. I didn't get back to Texas until 1980. So we left everything behind. We left a lot of childhood memories, of course, family and friends. And I had a horse and a dog, and everything was left behind, toys, clothes, everything. And that began this very strange life in California, you know. And from Orange, California, we moved to Huntington Beach, California. And it was there that I grew up as a young surfer. I started surfing at the age of 12, 11 or 12, and you know, kind of surfed every day until I was 24, you know, and that's when I moved to San Francisco, you know. But I grew up in the 60s and the 70s, you know, so the music was really great in Huntington Beach because we had a great club called the Golden Bear. And then we had a teen club right next to it called the Salty Cellar, you know, and you'd see all these great garage bands from that era. Limey and the Yanks, the East Side Kids, you know, all kinds of really cool bands. And then, of course, at the Golden Bear, I got to see like Paul Butterfield Blues Band for the first time when they first toured. I saw Big Brother and the Holding Company. You saw everyone from Cheech and Chong to Jimmy Reed, you know. It was a pretty amazing place. So there was a lot of clubs along the coast, the Rendezvous Ballroom in Balboa and the skating rinks on the pier and stuff that you'd go see bands, you know. Love played there. Buffalo Springfield played at a little club down the street. So yeah, it was a good time to grow up. You know, I saw a lot of great music. You know, and then the '70s took me to Hollywood, where I got to see people like Roxy Music and you know, Bowie hanging out at Rodney's on Sunset, and um, beautiful bands like the New York Dolls and the Stooges, of course, you know. And so I was in heaven. I loved it. Yeah. And
So
then we moved to
so sorry.
75, I think, 74 or 75. Moved to San Francisco. And it was there that I got involved with some friends who wanted to make a film about the worst band in the world. Uh, Actually, the film wasn't about the worst band in the world. It was about a young boy who believes to be in a band, you only have to, rock and roll can only truly be made by adolescents, was the basic plot of the film. And since we couldn't play, we became this kind of band that he finds, you know, and that led to the Nuns. You know.
Which we had a really cool show interview, which was one of the last times I saw you in person back in November. Our friend Edwin interviewed you for a segment about the Nuns, which is going to be coming out on video at some point, which I'm excited. We had a really, really fun talk for an intimate crowd. It really dug deep into like that late 1970s scene and what you were part of. But so did live music kind of enter your world as a teenager, seeing shows live, or were you listening to records at home? Were your siblings like an influence on what you were listening to?
Yeah, you know, I grew up listening to music because of my parents. You know, my dad loved Mexican music and country music, you know, and my mother loved big band jazz, you know. So I would come with her from San Antonio to Austin. We'd take the train and she'd come and buy her records, you know, and I'd come with her all the time. And when I was about 5 or 6 years old, I started collecting little 45s and stuff, you know. And like I loved like the Big Bopper, you know, and I loved Fats Domino, and then grew up loving like, you know, Jerry Lee and Little Richard and everybody, you know. And my older cousin was an Elvis Presley freak, you know. She had in her room was Elvis everywhere, posters, you know, and so yeah, I grew up with her. She taught me how to dance and stuff, you know. And I think I don't know if there's any, I hope there's not any photos or film, but when I was a little boy, I entered a talent contest as an Elvis impersonator, you know, so that was kind of funny. And
I
then
did not
and
know that. That's so cool.
yeah, it was stupid. And then uh, and then you know, when we moved to California, of course, rock and roll was blowing up, you know, and radio was blowing up. So you have to remember that back then, even on AM radio was kind of like what FM radio became, you know, where it was very open and you could hear anything from Sun Ra to Marvin Gaye to The Doors to, you know, the Stones, Yardbirds or Pretty Things or whatever. So yeah, it was full of, it was a beautiful world to discover, and be part of. And yeah, so we went to every show we could, we ate up everything. And luckily in Huntington Beach, there was a record store on Main Street by the pier. And this old hippie guy ran it, and he would always turn me on to the latest English records. He was kind of an Anglophile. So, he would turn me on to the first time, the Enemy and Melody Maker and Sounds. He would order and always make sure I had a copy. And then, he'd turn me on to like the first Roxy Music album and Bowie and, T-Rex and Mata Hoople records, so that's where I really got turned on to that stuff.
I love that your influences were such a broad spectrum of genres, and I really do feel like it. If you put on all your records in sync, starting with just your solo career records, there you really do have a sound that is kind of all over the map in a really interesting way with different instruments and types of songs you write. And it sounds like that influence really did really affect your output and what you're doing today.
I think it's partially like the record collection. The collection is broad. It has everything. I love anything that's beautifully and soulfully played. I love, right? So it's partially that. And it's also, my brothers were really, my brothers were great musicians, and are, so they really influenced me on the compositional qualities of music, and how to put bands together, how they did it. And when they joined Santana, I really got to see how someone could put together what seemed like disparate kind of sounds and rhythms together to make Santana was pretty phenomenal when I first heard them. It was pretty mind blowing for all of us, I think. So that was really interesting, and it really stuck with me. And so it's funny because I love the Dolls, I love the Stooges, I love, punk rock, I love the Pretty Things and the Yardbirds and all those bands. But when I started writing music on my own, the songs became much more personal and kind of very folky in a way. And so I think that the influence of people like Tim Buckley and Tim Hardin and of course, Dylan and Leonard Cohen and Neil Young and all those guys. At first, that's kind of what really came out. And slowly but surely, I learned how to kind of mesh all those things together.
That's yeah. And then when did a guitar fall in was a guitar your first instrument before you were writing songs or learning songs? Was
Well,
that your
there was always a guitar around, and I pick it up every now and then and play around with it. But I never studied the guitar, really cared to be a musician in that way. At first, I wanted to write screenplays, and I just wanted to be a writer. And so when we decided to make this movie, we rented a guitar from Mill Valley Guitar Music Store in Mill Valley, or Terra Nova, or someplace like Terra Linda, excuse me. And and we never took it back. We kind of ripped it off, and that became my first guitar. And yeah, we were criminals. We'd do anything to get that band moving. The Nuns, that was the Nuns. And
so your
so
first guitar is when you started making that movie?
yeah,
That's interesting.
and that's when I really kind of just put those three E, D, and A together, and you know, that kind of opened the door to a lot of things. It was funny, but it worked. I mean, it really kind of opened the door to everything I do today. If it wasn't for the Nuns, I wouldn't have done it.
Why do you if I mean this might be too broad of a question to ask, but why do you think or how it's pretty phenomenal how many great musicians have come through the Escovedos in your family. Why do you think that is? Why is it magic? Is there something what happened? How is it possible?
I think that you know, that's a really kind of a mystery. I mean, it's a hard thing to explain other than, my brothers and my dad was always so into music, and my father loved, he sang in mariachi bands in the 30s, and he always thought of himself as a crooner. He thought he was a singer. He's pretty funny. Sheila E. does a great impression of my father singing. Um, but yeah, and when we were kids and we'd go from Southern California up to Northern California to visit all our relatives, brothers and sisters in the Bay Area, it was usually around holidays, Christmas or Thanksgiving or something. And invariably there would be like a talent show or whatever. Everyone would get in the living room and start dancing. We do the stroll with lines on each side, doing like, Soul Train does, how people dance down the line, we would do that. And everyone would sing a song or something. And, Sheila and her brothers and sisters were like the Jackson Five or something. They could dance, they could sing, they told jokes. I mean, it was amazing, So that was always fascinating. And I always thought of them, they had something about their sense of rhythm and that beautiful thing that rhythm does to you, how it frees you, liberates you physically and spiritually, I think, And they had that, and so I was always fascinated with what they did and how they did it, especially my older brothers and how they carried themselves, But I think that what you're asking is how did that happen? And I really don't have an answer. And I'd love to just give all the credit to my parents, really, because I think, when I know that my mother and father, when the Beatles played on Ed Sullivan, we watched like millions of other people. We watched, like the whole nation watched Ed Sullivan that night. And my parents were the first to go out and buy us Beatle albums. My father loved loved Jim Morrison because he said he was a real singer. He thought he would have a great voice. And my mother loved Mick Jagger, so because she loved the way he danced and pranced around, I guess. And so, they would buy us all those records. It was really cool. My aunt would come from the Bay Area and she'd bring records with her, for us. So we were always open to that, and it was really kind of funny because when I first started to kind of show interest in being a musician or an artist of some kind, my mother freaked out. She didn't want that. She wanted me to be a lawyer. A civil rights lawyer was what my mother wanted for me. Either that or a priest. And I couldn't. And I couldn't
I love that.
fulfill
A
those.
lawyer or a priest.
I couldn't fulfill those dreams for her. So music was not a viable answer.
So then it turns
We had
in.
we had the classic. We had the classic butting of heads and stuff.
Well, it seemed to work out okay.
So it worked out. Yeah.
Well, I want to talk, about the 1980s, moving to Austin, and Rank and File and the True Believers. But before we kind of jump into that chapter, would you play a song for us?
Yeah, I will. Only because it's you, Casey.
Oh,
I will say no to
and the
Casey
million other people
Turner.
watching. And if you are just joining us, this is Alejandro Escovedo, our guest today on Talk to Me. Take it away, Al.
Like I said, I haven't been playing a lot, so I'll try to remember this song. Let's see. When blew my friend away, flew away yesterday. Government lies, children died, they still won't heal the poor. Is there money to be made off the people's parade? They're selling broken hearts outside the door. So I'll write something blue, melody I played for you. I'll sing something blue. You claim a mystery like a hurricane memory. St. James is hanging in the breeze. We turn another cheek in velvet armor chic. We sing for the workers of tomorrow. So I'll write something blue. Melody I play for you. And I'll sing, yes, I'll sing something blue. Nobody wants you, something blue. Maybe you'll turn to something blue. Maybe they'll see what the people need today. Let everybody say, hey, hey. Another spooky rainy day, magpies flown away, searching for love lost along the way. If this beginning has no end, let the one-man band begin. There's always time to tell another story, so I'll write something blue. Melody I play for you, and I'll sing, yes, I'll sing something blue. Something blue. I'll play for you. Something blue.
Oh, I love it. Here's something you haven't heard in a while. Some applause. Oh man, if you're just joining us, this is what's that?
I said I applaud myself all the time, actually.
If you are just tuning in, this is my guest Alejandro Escovedo. He's in Austin, Texas. One of my favorite songwriters, favorite people, and it's such an honor to have him on. Please do let us know where you're watching from. If you've ever seen Al in concert, let us know where. Share some experiences below, and please share this video and get more people watching. Also below, you'll see a link to Alejandro's website where you could buy his records and merchandise. And there's a link there if you want to throw $1 or $2 towards this podcast live cast, because while we're not doing any shows, we ain't making no doughs. So it's tricky, confusing times, especially for a concert promoter. But for those of you that don't know, I'm in San Francisco, and Alejandro has graced many of my intimate stages over the years, and we've had some fun times. And one of my favorite things about having you, all those times, I don't even know how many times we've done shows. It's a different show every time. You know, there might be some of the same songs worked in. You might hear a story or two that you heard, but the arrangement, the sonic experience is different every time. So if you see Alejandro 3-4 times in a row in a market, I feel like it's a different experience each night, and I really appreciate that.
Well, I've always tried to. I've always had, it's always given me great pleasure to work with different musicians in different kind of settings and different set lists and different vibes, because of what, of course, like when I made the record Burn Something Beautiful, and we toured with the -5, and that show was so killing. The one at, excuse me, at Hop Monk, the show that we did at Hop Monk. And that band, that band was amazing, and I love playing with them because the sound really did kind of encompass everything I love about rock and roll. The volume and the guitars and Kurt and the harmonies that Scott, and then Pete's guitar playing. It was just a killer band. I really enjoyed that a lot. And then I also love coming out and playing with the string quartet. I've been working on, we were talking about not having an income as a result of not being able to work. So I've been thinking of new, other ways to kind of, make some money, I guess, is the basic thing. And so I'm working on a live record that I'm going to stream, through Bandcamp, I guess, and Yep Rock. Yep Rock's helping me with
Mhm.
it also. But I've been going back and listening to everything from solo shows to string quartet shows, through Buick McCain shows, to True Believers, everything, And it's always different, and it's always I love that about it. Actually, that's something I must have.
To this day, there was aside from doing venue shows, I've been very lucky to host Alejandro in my house concert series. There's a few really beautiful homes in the Bay Area, if you weren't aware, and some of them are owned by very gracious concert songwriting loving fans. And we've done some pretty big shows inside living rooms. And one particular, this is years ago, but we were at our friend Dana and Paul's house in Piedmont, and Alejandro brought a gentleman named Matt Fish. I believe his name is Matt Fish, who played cello. And to this day, I still get people will come up to me after any other show. They'll be like, my favorite show of yours ever, Casey, you've ever put on was when Matt Fish was with Alejandro. My mind was blown that night, and but I've also heard that same kind of feedback from other shows with you. That night that Peter Buck was rocking and had to kind of nudge the guy who was trying to climb on stage. And people's memories of your shows really stand out. There's always something special that happens. I feel like in any
You
kind
know,
of live concert event. But
oh, I was going to say that, excuse me, but I was going to say that the show with Matt Jaffe too, the show that I did at Hot Monk with Matt was really beautiful. And,
that was the last
it's been a
time.
long,
That was our last show together.
oh, that's right. Yeah. Yeah, but that was a great show. In fact, he reached out the other day and we kind of exchanged texts. So it was nice to hear from him. He's a wonderful musician. He's really talented.
Yeah, Matt Jaffe is a Bay Area songwriter, guitarist, and I think he's 24 years old, maybe shy of 25, young guy. And Al asked him to accompany him at our Hot Monk show, and I think he learned like 20 songs in a few days. I don't even know if you guys rehearsed, and it sounded like you guys had been on tour for 2 years.
Yeah, well, that's a testament to how great Matt is, because anything that I threw, in fact, I think I even played songs that weren't on the set list that night, and he just dug in and he played his heart out. It was amazing. It was really great. You know,
I
I
think
love
that
it.
show was over 2 hours long. It was great.
Yeah, but
I wish
I've
that
had
was
a lot.
right now.
Another favorite show of mine with you was that show we did in North Beach at that little club, the Purple Onion. Is that right?
Uh, yeah, it was called Doc's Lab, but it was prior to that the legendary Purple Onion before they remodeled it, and great
Right.
intimate
That was,
space. Oh
uh, that was a great room. Did we do 2 nights there? I think we did 2 nights, I believe. I don't know.
yeah, I think that particular what we did was we did one night at Doc's, one night at Hot Monk, and then we went back to Doc's because their schedule we couldn't do two in a row because something was already booked or something. So we just jumped all over the Bay Area that weekend. um, Speaking of jumping all over with this timeline here, so the Nuns, which didn't really, like you were saying, intend to be as like a band like you thought it was going to be, really did spark your career and what you got started. It was your kind of gateway into to where we are today, really. But and one of the really amazing things about that band was the opening for the Sex Pistols last show ever at Winterland, which I can't even imagine being at that show, let alone being on stage. That must have been outstanding. But what happened? So when the Nuns kind of ended that little run, and then you moved to Austin. What brought you to Austin, Texas, and then how did that enter your world into Rank and File?
Well, the way it happened was, first of all, people forget that uh, Rank and File began as a group with three of the Nuns: Raphael on drums, Dietrich on vocals, myself on guitar, and Tony Kinman from the Dills on bass. We played a gig opening up for the Avengers, I believe it was, at Mabuhay. We then kind of liked it a lot and went to go make a recording at the Automat and asked Chip Kinman, Tony's brother and other partner in the Dills, to come and join us. I felt we needed a guitar player. So he came and we recorded some songs. We recorded a Dills song. We wrote a few. We actually had written Rank and File at that time. And when the Nuns went to New York, we lived at the Chelsea Hotel. That was right after the Sex Pistols show. We went to the Chelsea. And that was our home base. And we played CBGBs, we played Max's, we played Hurrahs, we played a lot of cool places. And we would travel from New York to Philly to DC, Boston. We just kind of live at the Chelsea. And then the Nuns went back to San Francisco and I stayed in New York. And I played with Judy Nylon, who was a wonderful artist who had sang backup with Brian Eno and John Cale, Judy's Airlines, that song on the Brian Eno record. And let me think. And she had also sang with John Cale, and she had a band with Pat Paladin called Snatch. And then I met her in New York, and I played with her for about 2 years. And that was an amazing experience. And I think of all the bands I've been in, I think I learned more from her and that group of musicians that I got to play with, It was so New York, and it was so, it was really kind of this performance artist kind of rock and roll approach to it, She was a great artist and wrote some really great songs. And when I joined the band, like Pat Place from the Bush Tetras was in the band. I took Jody's place from the Ray Beats, a lot of people were in that band. That was really cool. And then when the Dills broke up in San Francisco, Chip called me in New York and said, I'm coming out, let's reform Rank and File. And that's when we did that. And New York just happened to be the wrong place to do a country band, at that time. And so we had Barry Myers, Scratchy Myers, who was, when the Clash toured, he was their DJ. He's also in a movie called Rude Boy, if you know the Clash movie, Rude Boy. And Kevin Foley on drums, who had played with me in the Judy Nylon band, So that was the rhythm section, and we toured all the way across the US, and Austin was one of our places that we went to. We picked up Tony in Portland. The band broke up on the way back to New York. And then Tony and Chip and I decided we would move back to Austin, that was a place we were going to find the kind of musicians we wanted in order to make the kind of music we were making. And we moved to Austin in I believe it was late 80, 81, and fell in love with Austin. I was so happy to be back in Texas too, And, this is where I've been ever since, it feels like home. Yeah.
And so now that you're in Austin, at some point, Rank and File does kind of come to an end, and you and your brother Javier found the True Believers. And I feel like, I don't know, you're already gaining success with these other bands, but True Believers had a pretty mega cult following, especially in the Texas area. Did that band do a lot of touring outside of Texas? I feel like I wasn't sure exactly what. Because I know that also had a lifeline on it. Anyways, can you talk about? Was this the first time you performed in a band with a sibling?
Yes, it was the first band I had with a sibling. Performed with a sibling, and it was my brother Javier who had a great band. The first punk rock single on the West Coast was Javier's band, The Zeros, a song called Wimp. And so Javier came out to Austin and we began the True Believers then. and he had a bunch of songs, great songs, and I was just starting. I wrote my first song for the True Believers, a song called "The Rain Won't Help You When It's Over." And we began the band, and at first it was a rhythm section. It was Denny DeGorio and a guy named Kevin. I can't remember his last name. Keith Carnes. That's who it was on drums. And then we went to LA, did a demo. It didn't work out. We came back, and that's when we got Ray Washam on drums, who was in a band called the Big Boys, and we got John D. Graham on guitar, also. And that's the band that kind of took off and became the True Believers. But we toured all the time. We were touring 8 to 10 months out of the year, so we were on the road constantly. And we got a great following, but we just could never make the records that represented that following, So our first record was for EMI, Rounder, and then we made a second record with a different producer, Jeff Glicksman, and that record was about to be released when there was a big takeover at EMI, and they chopped. I think they let go of 13 bands in one day. We were one of them. So it was pretty crazy. And then we didn't have a label. The band eventually broke up, and that's when I began to play solo. Grudgingly. At first, I came back home, and I had a daughter, my daughter Maya, and I went to work at Sound Warehouse and sold other people's records for a while, and then I also painted houses, and then got a job at Waterloo Records, and I worked there for about 5 years. And during that time was when my album Gravity came out, my first solo record that Stephen Bruton produced. And Stephen and I made 3 albums together, which I love. I cherish those records.
I find it interesting that you're working at Waterloo Records, painting houses. I mean, there had to be people coming in there. You must have been good for business because you were in a pretty well-known band, and people are like, "Hey, man, you're in that band." That must have been interesting. Also, uh, and then I'm sure you had to explain to people daily, because you guys had taken a pause. You weren't. Were you really even playing music at all then, except for at home? Were you playing out at all during that time?
I was starting to. But for a long time, it was all about just kind of making a living, getting by, But it was funny because people would come into the store, other bands, we'd always have in-stores in the store. And it was usually bands that we had toured with or knew or friends, they would come in. And yeah, it was pretty funny. But that's when, even when my first album came out, when Gravity came out, and it was getting all these great reviews, I'd be at the counter selling records. Someone would go, "Hey, did you see this Rolling Stone review?" And I go, "Hey, wait a minute, I got to take care of this customer," and then I'd go over and read it, kind of thing. And that's when I started touring.
This is kind of so when Gravity came out, you were still working at Waterloo?
Yeah, I was working at Waterloo.
So wait, did you ever sell your own, like, did you ever ring up your Gravity while working there?
Yeah. I would have to sell my
That
own
would be the
records.
greatest photo. That would be the greatest photo. A young Alejandro, there in a t-shirt, ringing up his
Yeah.
own record. I think that would be that's amazing. I mean, it's one thing to sell your own merch at a show.
And it's funny because when I worked, my friend and I, Don, we kind of opened up the vinyl store, which was right around the corner from the main store. And we opened up the vinyl store. And when Chuck Prophet's album, Brother Aldo came out, I would play that record all the time. And I'd always go, "Hey, you got to have this record, man. You got to buy this record." So Chuck tells me that it's really funny because his record company would call him and say, "I don't know why, but there's a big spike in sales in Austin." And it was because I was playing it for everybody, and trying to get people to buy it, But that's a great record. I love that record. I played it the other day, actually.
You and I both have a very mutual admiration for Chuck Prophet, and honestly, he's the reason that I even got to meet you. We did Back in 2013 or so, Chuck had Alejandro out. They were working on a record together, and Chuck calls me, and he's like, "Hey, Casey," that's my Chuck Prophet impersonation. "Casey, I got Alejandro Escovedo in town. Trying to pay for his plane ticket. Can you throw together one of them house shows for us?" And I remember just being like, "Yeah." I didn't even look at my calendar. I just said yes, and we got it together like in a few days, and it was a wonderful, wonderful night. And then afterwards, you said, "I like doing this. Can I do some more of these with you without Chuck?" And I was like, "Yeah." And there it is. There's the birth of a beautiful thing.
Yeah,
Um,
that was cool.
but yeah.
Chuck
Well,
Chuck
so
and I,
92.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No,
No,
no.
I don't want to interfere.
There's a little. So for those of you all watching, there's a little bit of a delay. So we're not trying. I'm not trying to interrupt Alejandro. Sometimes there's just like that 4 second little. But no. Please continue your thought. My bad.
Well, no, no, no. I was just going to say that, writing with Chuck was really a wonderful experience in that, you know, I would get to go back to San Francisco. He would come out I was living out in Wimberley, out in the property out there. And so Chuck, I'd go to San Francisco, and with us, a lot of it was just kind of hanging out, and talking and telling stories and laughing a lot. And we'd go, we would, treat ourselves to going shopping after we'd write a good song. If we wrote a good song, then we'd go on a shopping spree and buy clothes and stuff. Go out to eat and stuff. But it was a lot of fun to write with Chuck. I really enjoyed it a lot. And my friend Anthony. I don't know if you remember Anthony. Did you ever meet Anthony? Anthony
I'm
Albertson.
not. I'm not for sure. I don't think so.
Yeah, because I'm pretty sure he was around when we first started playing your shows, but maybe not. Anyway, he passed away, but he would hang out with Chuck and I. He was a great guy. It was good fun. I'm sorry. Go ahead. You were going to say something.
No, I was, Chuck was going to be definitely part of this conversation because, the collaborations and co-writing that you guys have done together, it's just yet another kind of spotlight on, um, how great you are collaborating with other folks and how different records and bands will sound through the years with you because you're always kind of interchanging, who's playing with you on tours and who's going to be on the record. Has there ever been like a stretch where it has been the same band 3 4 records in a row, or did when you put Gravity out and then your follow up record and you eventually quit the record store, obviously, did that start that kind of like wormhole of just always wanting to work with other musicians and bring different spice kind of to the table to give it diversity every time, or
Yeah, it was funny because when Gravity came out, I had a band. It was called the Alejandro Escovedo Orchestra, and it was anywhere from 5 to 15 pieces on any given night. It was all improvisational, and it was all the best players in town. Alex Koch on saxophone. I had the jazzers. I had the Latin percussionists. Hector Munoz was usually on drums. Um, the guys who became the Bad Livers, they would play with me. Are you familiar with the Bad Livers?
I, I'm not, but that's an amazing band name.
They were a great band. So you should check them out. But anyway, they would play with me. I had keyboards and vocalists and the whole thing. And that was a really cool band to be part of. And that started my South by Southwest tradition of closing on Sunday nights. And that's when we would invite other people to come who were in town. Everyone would show up on a Sunday night at La Zona Rosa, and we would play, these wonderful shows, with strings and horns and everything. And then on the other side of that, I had a band called Buick McCain. And we were basically like an alcohol fueled party on wheels that played very, very loud. We were very obnoxious, irreverent to everything around us. And we were probably the most hated band in Austin. So on the one hand, I had the most loved band in Austin. On the other hand, I had the most hated band in Austin. So that's how it's always kind of worked with me. I love playing with different people. So yeah, that's part of the collaboration.
And as a fan and a listener, like I was saying earlier, I really appreciate that because I mean, well, as a promoter, I put on a lot of shows a year, and when people come through, there have been times there's artists that have kind of the same show you've seen already 4 or 5 times, which I'm not putting down, but it's way more interesting when someone can bring a totally different show. I mean, and that's how you really grow an audience too, right? I mean, people want to come back and bring their friends, but they also want to experience something fresh or new or different to their ears every time. And again, like I applaud you for doing that. And Chuck too. Chuck's really good at like um, keeping it interesting. There's people that are made to perform, and you're really good at that. And also, you're really good at like when you have a full rock band, you'll slow things down and tell a story in between everything, which is I think really cool. And you'll have a whole standing room just quiet to hear your story. I love that.
Yeah, it's been, the storytelling part of it has always been kind of the core of my songwriting, right? I mean, that's what I love to communicate with people are these stories. And
Mhm.
in the beginning, an album like Gravity, let's say, was really about the death of my partner, and she committed suicide. And so that was a very difficult time, and it was a very difficult album to write. And it attracted a lot of people who were going through very similar experiences. Some had thought of suicide themselves, and or knew their brother or sister, someone close to them, had committed that act. So I got a lot of people, a lot of letters, a lot of communication from people who were going through the same kind of thing. And after a while, it becomes a little difficult to carry all of that, other people's grief, right?
Yeah.
On the one hand, you can kind of see where you were, and you can see that you're making progress, hopefully. But on the other hand, it always draws you back to the kind of core of that, what created that feeling, right? And so slowly but surely, I tried to find ways to write stories through characters sometimes, that were sometimes only thinly veiled, but it was an attempt to try to get away from myself in a way and still write stories. And yet at the same time, still trying to tell your own story because that's the story to tell, right? You know, so
Yeah, I mean, right away with your first record, you realize that music is medicine in a lot of ways, and the effect you can have on the listener. Because I mean, when I talk to fans that have been fans of yours for a long time, I feel like that they do feel close to you. They feel like they know you because your songs are so deep and they reach them, and you share so much in your writing.
yeah, that's good and bad, I think. It's
Mhm.
been beautiful to be able to communicate with people something that they probably wouldn't have spoken of, or maybe tried to bury deep inside them, or some issues are kind of difficult to kind of just face. And through song, it becomes a little more, uh, it becomes easier to deal with those things and to see those things and maybe to see yourself sometimes. And so that's the beauty of music for me has always been it's not only given me the ability to work things out through song, through music, but also to share that with other people and to have that feedback, that immediate feedback of love or distaste or whatever it is, but it's real, it's just there. And that to me, the beauty of the live music experience is incomparable to any other art form, I think. I just love it. I love it for that reason. And as much as I sit here now in this lockdown and say, hey, I kind of like this being alone and not seeing a lot of people. I mean, I really do sometimes just miss, the communication so much. Yeah. So I can't wait to get out again.
Oh, we can't wait to see you in the flesh again and hear you on a stage. But if you're down for, I think this is a good time to maybe play another song for us if you'd like.
Alrighty.
Again, my guest here is Alejandro Escovedo in Austin, Texas. And thank you guys all so much for tuning in. We're going to talk a little bit more, get to some fan questions, and but we really do appreciate everyone watching. Alejandro Escovedo.
All right. Let me write. I mean, write. Let me play you one of my very first songs. It's an old song, but I love. Let me get situated here. Oh wait, let me try that again. Can we try that again? Sky is black, Billy feels bad. Today thinks that he'd be better off dead. Hears pain roaring in his head. He'll close his eyes, the world turns red. Her name was Hope, her hair was blacker than the sky. She had a smile that made the devil cry. She held his hands, looked him in the eye. She said, believe, believe in everything will be fine. Everything will be alright. There's a day you can bet on that. I heard her close the door, she ain't looking back. Twist of fate or a stroke of luck. The answer's over there beyond the wishing well. Everything will be alright. Take the fire in your hands, place it at her feet. Walk upon the mountains and then you'll sail across the sea. Her eyes are taken from the stars above, her voice, 5 hearts breaking. Her voice, 5 hearts breaking. Her voice is 5 hearts breaking. The sky's a fire waiting to die, and his heart's as empty as a dead man's eye. She held his hands, looked him in the eye. She said, believe, believe in everything will be fine. Everything will be alright. Everything will be alright. Everything will be alright.
Uh, Alejandro Escovedo is our guest today, and that song's called Five Hearts Breaking, and that's off the Gravity record, his first album that came out in 1992. Thank you guys all again for being here and watching. We got a few more things we're going to talk about. We're going to do a couple fan questions, and then we'll call it a day. But we really do appreciate you all tuning in on this Memorial Day. And Alejandro, again, I'm going to say it again. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for all your art and music over the years. And it's just so great to see you still making art, great records. Your best records yet are still being made, which is amazing, and not everyone can say that, you know.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it very much. Thank
And I mean it too. I mean, I'm not just like just saying. I mean, you're every time you put a new record out, I'm like, how is he going to top that? And you do.
you. Well, thank you for having me. I
um,
appreciate it a lot.
One thing we're talking a lot about these early years, but so it's 1992. You got Gravity out. You're selling your own record at Waterloo, and I mean, 6 years is a decent amount of time, but relatively speaking, in the spectrum of things, it's not that much time. So I found this quote in 1998, 6 years later. No Depression named you Artist of the Decade. So I think that's such a testimonial to like what you did in that span in the mid 90s there. When you hear something like that, when you've been called Artist of the Decade, how do you how do you receive that information? What does that feel like?
I'll be honest with you. I never, I still am very uncomfortable with those kind of things, and I always have a difficult time accepting it, and I can think of, a lot of other people who deserve it as much as, if not more. So, usually more than I do, and they don't get it. And I wish, I mean, it's a great honor, and but my friends teased me for years after that. They call me haircut of the decade or whatever. They'd make up titles for me. So it's always been difficult to accept that kind of stuff, and it still is. And I'm deeply honored by it. It was amazing, um, but I don't know how to answer that really, other than to tell you that it's not easy.
I asked a similar question to Bill Kirchen. If you guys know Bill Kirchen, another Austin uh, songwriter and guitarist, is what he's really known for from the Commander Cody days. And but Bill has been titled Titan of the Telecaster, and I asked
All
him,
right.
"What does that feel like?" And he said almost the exact same thing you just said. He just shook his head. He's just like, and he named like five people that play Telecaster that he feels are better. And it was a very kind of deflective, humbling response, and that's very similar. I totally, I see it. But
Yeah,
I remember, yeah. But just don't be so surprised. That's.
I'll tell you something. Like just recently, last year at the Austin Music Awards, not this past year, but the year before, they gave me an honor, and it was really, really something. It was a Towns Van Zandt uh, award for songwriting. Really humbling. And like Britt Daniel from Spoon came and inducted me, and uh, 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 Jacob Dylan was there to sing castanets, and Charlie Sexton put together a beautiful band. He had Brian Standifer on cello, and a lot of my old pals playing, and it was really something, you know. But when they called me to tell me that, I thought that they'd gotten the wrong number or something. So, you know, I didn't really accept it that well. You know, it was kind of like I told Lewis, who called me. I said, "Are you sure about this, man? Doesn't sound right." So it's never easy. I was, you know, it's funny because we talk about awards, but I was looking forward to the one uh, they gave me an award, the Libera Awards. Are you familiar with them? Like independent record music
Mhm.
organization, and John Prine and I were going to receive the Icon Awards together. You know, and you know, I had seen John for the last time I saw John was in Australia. He played a gig, and he asked me on stage at this beautiful theater in Melbourne, and you know, we had made plans to visit together, and you know, we're really looking forward to seeing each other in New York because we're going to play some songs together and stuff, you know. So, but I was looking forward to that one merely because John Prine was going to be there. You know, that was that was what was really drawing me. So it was a real drag when we lost him. You know.
I was in 2018. I was at the Americana Fest, as were you, and we went to the awards ceremony that night. And I ran into you and Nancy in the lobby there. You guys looking dressed to the T as you always do. I was very underdressed for the event. I was sunburnt and had been day drinking with all my friends from Hot Monk. But ran into you guys, and it was so wonderful to see you. And you know, when you saw me, you pulled me in and introduced me to people that were probably like, "Who's this kid that Alejandro's introducing me to?" And it was just such a wonderful moment. And that evening, you were presenting an award to John Prine. I believe it was like a lifetime achievement award of some sorts with the American.
It was Artist of the Year or Album of the Year, one of the two. And I didn't know it was going to be John Prine. We didn't know it was going to be John Prine. You know, so it was
Well,
really exciting.
it's super exciting. Yeah, so I consider you a friend, and I know that you've had some really cool collaborations and accomplishments from your onstage times with Bruce Springsteen, and I can name a bunch. But still sitting up there at the Ryman, seeing you come out and be with John Prine, because I know you guys are old friends. Nancy had told me the story about the pocket watch, and I would love for you to share that story. It's one of my favorite stories I've ever heard with a friendship in this industry. If you don't mind sharing that story, it's beautiful.
So, you know, at one point we were traveling through Switzerland, and I've always loved, you know, I love watches. So I always wanted one of those Swiss watches, pocket watches that the railroad would use, you know, and they're beautiful. So I had one, and I had it for a couple of years, I guess a few years, and it was a beautiful watch. I loved it. And I toured with John Prine for the better part of a summer, you know. And I think we toured a little bit, then we took a break, and after the last gig, you know, he would always have me out to sing with him. I'd always sing Paradise with him, and he'd watch from the wings. He'd always watch us. He'd let me, you know, play his guitar sometimes. You know, he's just such a beautiful guy, you know. And so at the last show, I had that watch, and and I gave it to him as a gift, you know. And like a year went by or so, and we played another gig in New York together, outside of New York. And the first thing he did, Fiona, his wife, told me that he loved the watch, you know. So when I saw him, he asked me, "What time is it? Do you know what time it is?" And I said, "No." And he pulls out the pocket watch, you know, and he had the pocket watch that I'd given him, you know. So when I saw him in Australia after all those years, he had the pocket watch. And at that point, he was doing this thing where he would lay his guitar down, you know, on the floor at the end of the show, and he'd dance around it. Fiona wanted me to be on stage to make sure that I could see this because he took the pocket watch and he started like swinging it like Cab Calloway style while he was dancing, you know. And that was the last time I saw him. That was that time, you know. But he loved that. He loved the watch, and it made me really happy that he loved the watch, you know. And every time I would see him, he'd ask me, "What time is it?" You know, and then he'd pull out the watch, you know, kind of thing. So yeah, it was a really sweet kind of thing.
You just gave me chills when you said that last part. That was just such a warming story and such a special relationship. And you know, I thought of you first whenever I heard of the passing. You were the first person that came to my mind. You know, because I knew that you guys knew each other on a personal level, and yeah, that was a tough
Yeah,
one
such
for
a great
everyone.
song. We were doing with Betty Sue. I toured with Betty Sue, and we did a version of "The Speed of the Sound of Loneliness." That was really cool. You know that song?
Mhm.
Do you
Yeah,
know that tune?
yeah.
Yeah, that's a great song.
Oh.
Anyway,
Well, again, we could talk about a million things, but I think we are kind of getting close to the end here. So I got some fan questions here. If you're happy with that, send us all over the map here. And again, thank you to everyone that's watched and been here, and thanks to Alejandro for hanging out with us. And thanks to the fans that submitted some of these questions in. So we're just going to start from the top here, and you can
okay.
answer them fast or in depth, whatever you want. Dave Osborne asks. Dave Osborne asks, "What habit or trait of yours really bugs Nancy?" We're getting real right away, Al.
uh, that's a that question has multiple answers. Let me see. I guess um, Nancy is a stylist and a beautiful lady and likes to look really nice when we go out, you know. And so sometimes I'm a bit impatient about getting on the road or whatever it is that we need to do. And that would be one of them, I would think.
Mike Chitwood asks, "Will will we see you do anything like the nuns again?"
Probably not. No, I wouldn't think so. Um, I wanted to make a record with my kids, you know, and we wanted to make a loud noise record, you know. So, if I can convince them to, once this is over, to do that with me, I would love to do it with my kids. Yeah, I do. I make a record with them like that. Yeah.
Um, Wayne Whelan, that's a mutual friend of ours. Wayne asks, given the great artists that you have collaborated with over the years, is there someone that you haven't had a chance to collaborate with that you wish you had, or is there like a wish list of someone that you'd like to work with that you haven't?
Well, of course, I always had the dream that I might work with Brian Eno or David Bowie, but I don't know that. Obviously, David's gone, um, and Eno's, you know, I don't know. He doesn't seem to be doing much production lately. Once Eno produced U2 and Coldplay, I kind of lost that dream. That dream faded from me.
John Bredding asks, "Do you ever miss your formative years with Rank and File or the True Believers?"
um, I miss the camaraderie. We had great camaraderie. Both of those groups. I mean, Rank and File was, not an easy band for me to be in. It was a difficult band for me to be in, but the True Believers, really in the beginning were wonderful. It was a real band, like a gang. We were all for one for all kind of thing, and we really made some great rock and roll. And I loved being in that band. Yeah, but I do miss the camaraderie a lot. Yeah.
Um, Al, oh, I cannot pronounce his last name. Sidolowski, maybe. Anyways, he asks, Do you ever plan to do a future performance with the string quartet? He says Room of Songs is sublime.
Mm. Yes, that's another project I'd like to revisit again, is to do another record, especially with Susan and Brian and David. It was a really powerful little group of musicians. So yeah, I would love to do that again. Yeah, give it another
Larry,
shot.
yeah, Larry Coney asks, do you think there'll ever be a chance of a True Believers reunion? Now, you guys did do, I think, a reunion at a South by one year, not terribly
Yeah,
long ago.
about 5 or 6 years ago, maybe. I don't know, but I think that was enough. You know, it was enough. I think we did everything we could. There was hopes that the band could re-record as a band, and it just didn't work that way. So, you know, but the True Believers were great, man. It was a great band.
Different chapters, different, different times of life. It's hard to go back to, 30 years ago and, try to recreate something, I'm sure.
I think there's a lot of relationships that are like that, in life, where whether it's a friendship, a romantic one, or whatever it is. I mean, it's hard to go back. And the True Believers, I think, just saw its day. It was a great band, and I'm glad that I was in that band.
Our next question comes from a really big fan of yours. Her name's Esmeralda Escovedo Flores. And she asks, Alejandro, who is your favorite sibling? And then she says, P.S. I know it's me.
That's my sister. Yeah. I'd have to say that they're all my favorite siblings. I love my sister Dolly. We grew up as Dolly. She grew up always being called Dolly. We called her Dolly. So yeah, she's definitely up there along with everybody else. I love all my siblings. Yeah.
I've gotten to meet a couple of them, and they are the sweetest people. They really are. You have a wonderful family, and I've gotten to meet a couple of your kids too. And I same thing. It's just really sweet people. Yeah, you really do
Thank
surround yourself with love. I got a few more questions here. Okay, Vince Silver asks. Oh, at first he makes a statement. He says, "I think The Crossing is one of the best and one of the most important records in the past few years. With all that's going on in the world today, where do you think your next album will be heading?"
I've thought about that a lot. Like, I've even thought of kind of uh, taking taken off as a starting point the crossing, the very last song, and maybe kind of trying to imagine where this character would be, Diego, and what he would have done and how he would have made his way back to Mexico, and whether he would have taken what he's learned from that journey into maybe music or writing of some sort. And so yeah, I've thought about that, but I think it's hard. It's very difficult for me not to write about what's going on around me at this point, politically, socially, and, spiritually and philosophically, all those things. We're going through a very kind of intense and dramatic time. And so it doesn't seem possible not to write about it. So yeah, I'm sure that the issues at hand will somehow surface through music and song, somewhere along the way. Yeah.
Mary Winzig asks, "Who is your favorite songwriter, and what album of theirs should I listen to, and why?" Loaded question.
It is. Um, You know, it's funny. It's hard to have a favorite songwriter. It's like one day it may be a cloudy day and the rain's falling, and I put on Leonard Cohen, and it all makes sense, and it's the perfect moment and the perfect time. And then at another time, you know, uh, there could be something happening in my life that just needs the Stooges first thing in the morning, and that makes sense to me, So um, my favorite songwriter, I'd have to say as a writer, you know, would be Lou Reed probably, um, because he was such an influence on me in the beginning, like his use of words, the stories that he told were so singular, and the way that they approached music from this kind of avant-garde folk rock, blending those things together with the dissonance and the noise and the subject matter was so special, so different, I'd have to say that an album like Magic and Loss, Lou Reed's album Magic and Loss, to me is one of the most profound, deep, poetic records ever made. And what he says within that album has, really kind of not only helped me observe and see things and learn things, but it's also been an inspiration to me on how to write and how to write music, how to write songs. I think Lou is always one. And if I had to choose one album, that would probably be it. Um, but there's so many great Lou Reed songs and so many great Lou Reed albums that there's a lot of people who don't get Lou Reed, and we all want different things from music, and I understand that, but it's hard for me to fathom how you can't respect the courage that it took to be Lou Reed in the world that he grew up in, and the world that we live in. So, Mary, that's the answer, and I miss Mary Winzig. She's a wonderful person.
Aw, that's a great answer. I'm saying this person's name right. Ma'am Melnick asked, "Who do you think is among the most underrated guitarist?"
Underrated guitarist. Chuck Prophet's probably one of the most underrated, I would
I
think, because
I knew I thought you were going to say that. I really did. Yeah, I
because
agree.
I feel that Chuck, he's such a songwriter now that, and he's got James, and they're both amazing. But Chuck's guitar playing is phenomenal, and I've always loved playing with him, Another guitar player I love is David Garza, who is just worked on Fiona Apple's latest album, but he's from here in Texas, and I love his playing. I love his playing. He's a phenomenal player. Another, um, there's so many cool guitar players. I mean, Matt Jaffe's a great guitar player. And not enough people hear him. But yeah, I'd have to say like Chuck. Chuck definitely, is someone that people, Stephen Bruton, in the end was known as a producer, but man, he was a phenomenal guitar player. He had such a cool, snaky, kind of slinky, sexy rhythm. That was just awesome. He was his own rhythm section. That was a Fort Worth thing. He'd always call it being dirty. I played dirty. It was so cool. It was very cool. But yeah, I'd have to say, for my money, probably Chuck.
Cool. Rich Rozanski asks, "Can you give us a brief overview of some of your gear, like your preferred guitar amp and guitar and pedals?"
Oh, okay. Well, I have a lot of guitars. Uh, right back
Or
there.
maybe is there a combo? Is there a combo that you just love that?
Well, that's a that's a '73 Les Paul custom that I put a Bigsby on that I love, and I play that with the two Magnatone Varsities. You know, they're both 18 watts, and I have a pretty standard pedal. I got these two pedals from Australia when I was playing with Tim Rogers, And his friend, because he had a pedal on his board that just was crazy cool. And so the guy came and gave me a couple pedals, and I love them, man. And hang on, let me find out what they're called. Hang on 1 minute. They're
Okay.
called
Oh, there's Suki.
they're called Maztronics. They're called Maztronics, M-A-Z-Z Tronics, and those pedals are amazing, man. But you know, I use a Neve DI for my acoustics, you know, which is a really phenomenal DI that I can use. But my acoustics, I have a lot of Tony Noble's guitars. Uh, Tony lives here in Wimberley, and he's made me 4 guitars now. My white Les Paul Jr. He made me a Les Paul Custom. He made me a Silvertone uh, like guitar, you know, like Chris Isaac model kind of guitar. And he made me a, you know, this one. This one's an old guitar I got from my friends in Kansas City many years ago. It's a 1956 J50, yeah, or 45. I don't know, it's some one of those. But my friend Matt Kessler and Jim Strong gave me that. So you know, those are my basic ones. Those are ones I use most of the time. But the two small varsities together, the Magnetones are amazing. And through that pedal board, you know, put a good guitar in the end. It's great. But, you know, I don't really, I love the sound of guitars, but I don't think of myself as a guitar player necessarily. You know, I like to make a lot of noise. You know, that's my thing.
I like the little this little gear geek moment of this conversation. That was fun. You do have some great instruments. I think it's that Les Paul back there. This is years ago when you were in Dallas, and I think it was that guitar. And you go, Casey, pick that up. And it is that the one that weighs like 400 pounds.
Yeah, it's like 400 pounds. Yeah.
It was just like
It's a
you were like,
guitar.
pick it up. I was like, whoa.
Yeah. It's the guitar that I used all through like Buick McCain years. That was the Buick McCain guitar. And I used it on solo stuff quite a bit, but it's way too heavy. I started to see photographs of me with that guitar on. I was always crunched over like that, you know. It was too heavy. So, but it's a beauty. It sounds great. You know, it's a great guitar.
I will say too, for being like a punk rocker and playing in lots of bands, your instruments are in phenomenal condition. You take good care of your stuff.
Well, I mean, you know, you don't want to screw up a. I remember uh, there was a band. I won't name the band. This, but the guy became pretty famous as a alternative country, alt country icon of sorts. But you know, I had my good guitars, and he wanted to use my guitar, so I let him use my guitar, and then they knocked it over on stage, you know, and I just felt that was sinful, you know. I mean, you know, you got to respect the guitar, man, because you know the guitars, a guitar like that old guitar, it's got so many songs in it, you know. It's like a moving, you know, it's alive, that guitar, you know. It breathes and it has stories to tell, you know, and it's got a life of its own. You know? Did you ever read that book called The Accordion Crimes?
Mm-mm.
No. I think that's what it was called. It was written by the woman who wrote the Shipping News. I don't know, Annie Prelo. I think that's how you pronounce her name. Um, but it's a beautiful story about an accordion that is made in Italy, and the gentleman brings it from Italy to the United States. He immigrates here, and he brings that accordion that he made, handmade, and he brings it in order to sell to bring his family over and start a new life in America. But what happens is that the accordion is put in many different hands, and all the story does is follow the accordion from New Orleans to, you know, Louisiana. I mean, deep in the bayous of Louisiana, up into Arcadia, you know, and back down. And I think it even ends up in the Southwest in a conjunto band or something. You know, it's a pretty fascinating book. but it's cool to write about instruments in that way because, they have a life of their own.
And that's a good segue to our final question here from Jim Fisk. He asked, Alejandro, how is the autobiography coming along?
Jim, um, it's coming along. It's coming along. It's developing at a slow pace, but like you said, there's a lot of life to kind of talk about, and I've always thought that it should be. I mean, I don't consider it an autobiography. I call it a mythical memoir. So that gives me space to kind of bend the truth a little bit, maybe, and to get, the edges are kind of fuzzy and hazy, but it is the truth and it is my story. But I'm trying to think of different ways to tell the story. And so I have a wonderful person who's helping me with it. John Philip Santos is a great poet and writer from San Antonio. And so we've been working on a lot that we have a lot to tell. There's a lot there to tell. So Jim, thanks for asking. And I hope you're well in Long Beach. We got to go surfing again one day.
This has been a really fun time, and it's been a great conversation. I'd be honored if you could leave us with a song.
Oh, I was afraid you were going to ask for another song. Let me see.
And thank you again for taking the time to sit and talk with us during this kind of pause moment in our career lives.
Oh, you know what I'll do one that Chuck and I wrote. And that kind of ties in the gentleman that asked that last question, Jim Fisk, is a great, great guitar player, jazz guitar player. He lives in Long Beach, but he's probably as I know it, my only remaining friend from high school, from those years, adolescent years. And he's a really cool guy. We ran into each other again. I don't know how we found each other. I think on Facebook or something, but So this is a song that Chuck and I wrote when we did Real Animal, the album. That was really the story of the nuns, And this is one about, when you asked me about San Francisco, moving to New York and living in the Chelsea Hotel. This is right after the Sex Pistols show. After that Sex Pistols show at Winterland, Sid Vicious came to the nuns' house and hung out with us there, where we lived in the Hayes Valley right there, Hayes and Divisadero we lived at. And we lived in a big Victorian there. And Sid came, spent the night, and then went on. But then again, when I was living in New York at the Chelsea, Sid came to rent a room one day with Johnny Thunders and Jerry Nolan of the Dolls, and he had Nancy with him, and so they were my neighbors for a short while, and this is the story of what happened eventually, I lived in the Chelsea once at 723rd. We came to live inside the myth of everything we'd heard. The poets on their bar stools, they just love it when it rains. They comb their hair in the mirror and grow addicted to the pain. I saw Neon Leon spotting the boys just before the cops arrived. He took off with the noise. It was nothing special, just another bar. Max's Kansas City life makes everyone a star. It makes no sense, and it makes perfect sense. It makes no sense, and it makes perfect sense. called him to room, said, come help with Sid. We went down, looked around, the dealer let us in. We thought he was hysterical, the knife was a joke. Don't know if he did what he said he did, nobody really knows. I stood out in the house, they busted down the door. A white tuxedo jacket top had him by his charm. He loved to show off that thing, no one knows for sure. We know they found Nancy in her black underwear, dead on the bathroom floor, and it makes no sense. And it makes perfect sense. You know it makes no sense. And it makes perfect sense. I lived in the Chelsea once at 723rd. We came to live inside the myth of everything we'd heard. The poets on their bar stools, they just love it when it rains. Comb their hair in the mirror and grow addicted to the pain. Makes no sense. It makes perfect sense. You know it makes no sense. And it makes perfect sense. And we all moved out. And we all moved on. You know we all moved out. And we all moved on and on and on. It makes no sense. And it makes perfect sense. You know it makes no sense. And it makes perfect sense.
Yes, I love rocking out on this Monday evening. This has been a really great time. This is Alejandro Escovedo in Austin, Texas. One of my favorite people, one of the best songwriters I've ever met, and one of my favorite artists to work with over these years. And I'm so excited to see you again in person and see you rock out on a stage in front of a full room again.
Well, you know, I hope that sooner than later, we'll have both of you and Bree out to. Bree hasn't been here yet, so we got to take her for barbecue down into Salt Lake. So I look
Oh
forward
yeah,
to it. And you know, I
yeah,
must
and
say,
thank
well, let me finish real quick. But for
yeah.
those of you who don't know KC, KC is one of the, not only just one of the sweetest and coolest people around, but puts on, he's a great promoter, and I love working with him. So KC, thanks for all the gigs over the years. It's been a lot of them, and
It's
we'll have some more.
my honor, my
That's
pleasure.
cool.
It's an honor to work with you. It's an honor to call you a friend.
Well, thank you. I feel the same way. I feel the same way. Thank you.
And thank you all again for tuning in and watching this. Again, below you'll see a link to Alejandro's website. You can buy his latest record, The Crossing, along with all his other amazing albums and merchandise. And if you want to throw a couple bucks a tip for this adventure, please do. It'd be awesome. And our next one is this Thursday, May 28th, with two songwriters in Portland, Oregon. Anna Tivell and Jeffrey Martin are going to be on the program. That's going to be a lot of fun. So please join us again. And next month we have some more coming. So, but with that, I can't say thanks enough to my great guest today, Mr. Alejandro Escovedo.
Thank you so much. I hope to see you real soon. All right. Thanks for
All right.
everything.
Love you, man. Thanks, everybody.
Love
Please,
you.
everyone, stay safe and stay healthy. And we'll all get together and hang out again soon at a show. Cannot wait for that. Take care, everybody. Have a good day.